For 24 years, she silenced attorneys and ruined lives, until one man flipped the script and had her arrested right in her own courtroom. Inside the Jefferson County Courthouse in Birmingham, Alabama, the air felt thick, not because of the humidity outside, but because of something far heavier. A truth unspoken, yet deeply embedded in the walls after decades of silence. Everyone who stepped through those massive oak doors understood how things operated in Judge Meredith Langford's courtroom. She was the kind of judge who rarely lifted her gaze above her reading glasses, but when she did, her sharp eyes sliced through attorneys as if they were nothing more than minor nuisances. Her voice was never raised, always measured, yet the authority in it crushed anyone foolish enough to challenge her. For 24 years, Langford sat on the bench, long enough to build a legacy. Not the kind found on plaques or in law school case studies, but the kind whispered about in corridors and muttered in hushed tones at bar association meetings. Attorneys, especially black attorneys, knew exactly what they were up against when their case landed in her courtroom. Her rulings always seemed to lean in one direction. The objections she sustained or dismissed followed a pattern, one nobody could prove, yet everyone recognized.
And today?
That pattern was about to be broken. Darnell Hayes strode into the courtroom, the sharp click of his polished shoes echoing against the marble floor. He had been here before many times, but today was different. Today, he wasn't just another defense attorney standing before Judge Langford. Today, he had something she never saw coming. At 48 years old, Darnell had built his career on taking the cases others wouldn't touch. His reputation stretched far beyond Alabama, known for dismantling prosecutions with precision, making him a target for judges like Langford. But that never stopped him. What did give him pause, just for a brief second, was the look in her eyes as he approached the defense table. She already despised him. Not for this case. Not for anything he had said. But simply because he was who he was. Darnell could feel the weight of this moment pressing down on him. This wasn't just about his client, Tyrone Wills, a man falsely accused of armed robbery. This wasn't just about proving innocence. This was about something far bigger. And he wasn't leaving this courtroom without making that clear. "Mr. Hayes," Judge Langford said, barely glancing up from the paperwork before her. "You're already on thin ice in my courtroom. Don't waste my time today." The trial hadn't even started. There was no reason for her to say that. Darnell tightened his grip on his briefcase, keeping his expression unreadable. "I'll try not to, Your Honor." Langford smirked. "Good. I have a full docket, and I won't tolerate theatrics." She turned to the prosecution. Philip Calloway, an eager young assistant district attorney, fresh out of law school and trying too hard to impress the wrong people. "The state is ready, Your Honor," Calloway announced, throwing a smug glance in Darnell's direction. Of course they were ready. They were always ready, especially when the case was stacked against a black man. Beside Darnell, his client Tyrone sat with his hands folded, shoulders hunched forward, the posture of someone who had spent too much time in the system. Seen too much. Lost too much. Darnell leaned in slightly. "We're ready too," he said, loud enough for the whole courtroom to hear. Judge Langford exhaled sharply through her nose. "Let's get this over with." The trial began, but it wasn't a trial. It was a performance, and Judge Langford was its star. Every objection Darnell raised, overruled without hesitation. Every time Calloway stumbled over a legal point, she guided him, like a teacher correcting a favored student. The jury noticed. The gallery noticed. But no one dared to speak, except Darnell. He studied her, the way her lips curled when he spoke, the way she barely masked her contempt. This wasn't just bias. It was something worse. Something he had spent years preparing for. But the courtroom didn't know that yet. Langford didn't even try to conceal it. Every time he spoke, she interrupted. Every valid argument he made, dismissed with a wave of her hand, as if swatting away a fly. Courtrooms had a rhythm. Lawyers spoke, judges ruled, juries listened. But in this courtroom, the verdict had been decided before the trial had even begun. Darnell caught the jury shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Even some of the white jurors, who may have entered with their own biases, couldn't ignore what was happening. But Langford didn't care. She doubled down. "Mr. Hayes," she said sharply, "you're testing my patience." "Mr. Hayes, one more baseless objection, and I'll hold you in contempt. Mr. Hayes, this is a courtroom, not a lecture hall. If you want a grandstand, do it elsewhere." Darnell remained calm on the outside, but inside, his blood was boiling. Not because she was insulting him, he could handle that, but because she had made it personal. And that was her mistake. Still, he needed her to keep talking, to keep exposing herself. "Your Honor," he said evenly, "the prosecution just introduced evidence that was not disclosed in discovery. That is a clear Brady violation. I move for an immediate mistrial." Langford leaned back in her chair, adjusting her glasses with exaggerated boredom. "Denied." Darnell didn't blink. Not out of shock, but out of strategy. He let the silence hang for a beat before speaking again. "To be clear, Your Honor, you're refusing to acknowledge a Brady violation?" Langford's lips pursed. "I said denied, Mr. Hayes." A shift rippled through the courtroom. Reporters scribbled faster. Whispers in the gallery grew louder. Even Langford sensed it. Her eyes darkened as she locked onto Darnell. "You are dangerously close to being held in contempt, Mr. Hayes." Darnell tilted his head. "For what, Your Honor?" "Asking the court to follow the law." Langford slammed her gavel, the sound cracking through the air. "That's enough," she snapped. "One more word, and I'll have you removed." The room was dead silent. Darnell could hear his own heartbeat. But he wasn't nervous. This was exactly what he needed. His client Tyrone clenched his fists. "Man, don't let her do this to you," he muttered, voice barely above a whisper. Darnell didn't even glance over. "I have nothing further, Your Honor," he said smoothly, taking his seat. Langford scoffed, acting as if she had won. But she had no idea. The real game had just begun. Then, the heavy double doors of the courtroom burst open. 2 federal agents in dark suits strode inside. Their movements were crisp, deliberate. Langford's irritation flickered into something else. Something dangerously close to fear. "Judge Meredith Langford," one of the agents said, flashing a badge. "We have a warrant for your arrest." A collective gasp filled the courtroom. For the first time in 24 years, Judge Langford had lost control.
"And Darnell?"
He simply leaned back, smoothed his tie, and watched. Because this time, she was the one on trial. Darnell stepped back, letting the agents do their job. He didn't need to say anything more. The evidence, the charges, the very sight of Langford in cuffs, it all spoke louder than words ever could. Tyrone Wills, the man who had been fighting for his freedom in this courtroom, sat motionless beside the defense table. Slowly, he turned to Darnell, disbelief and awe mixing in his eyes. "Man, you really did it," he whispered. Darnell gave a small nod, but his expression remained steady. This wasn't about celebration. It was about justice long overdue, but finally here. As the agents guided Langford past the defense table, she stopped just for a moment, her eyes locking onto Darnell's one last time. There was no more arrogance, no more condescension, just the hollow recognition of a woman who had spent decades above the law, only to fall by it. The doors swung open again, this time to the blinding flash of cameras and the roar of reporters waiting outside. And as Judge Meredith Langford disappeared from the courtroom in handcuffs, Darnell Hayes took his seat once more, because there was still a trial to finish.